All right, and we're recording. I want to welcome everybody once again to another one of my webinar interviews. And a lot of you will recognize in one of these box frames the familiar face of my former colleague, Dr. Rodney Howsare. I'm very, very happy that he's here joining us again for another one of these. I'm really kind of sad that you weren't around for my last interview with Louis Ayres, because did you happen to watch
a good bit of that? It was very good.
Louis, if you're watching this, that was, I think, the best interview I've done. Just because Louis is such a lively guy and a smart guy. I mean, wow, just everything that we talked about was just electric, I thought, and I've gotten more positive feedback from that interview than any of the ones I've done so far, and I've done some good ones with some really good people.
Yeah.
And now here we are with you guys. Okay, so everybody knows my colleague, former colleague, Dr. Rodney Howsare, chair of the Department of Theology at DeSales University in Center Valley, Pennsylvania, which is just south of Bethlehem, PA, the Lehigh Valley, as we call it. And also, though, joining us today is a former student of both Rodney's and mine, Mr. Jason Bach. And Jason was a theology major. You were a theology major, right, at DeSales? I can't remember now. Or you could have been one of those like guys who had like 10 majors. That's that. I know you majored in theology, but you may have majored in like 1,800 other things.
Literature.
Kind of like, well, who was that guy, Howsare, that gosh, I can't think of his name. Now I'm embarrassed. He had like 8 degrees from
Max Potts.
Max Potts, yeah. Max, if you're watching,
he took everything.
Your ears are burning now. You're no Max Potts, though, Jason.
No,
but anyway, but Jason then did go on to get his master's degree in theology. Wasn't it from St. Charles Seminary?
Yes, it was.
Yes, from St. Charles Seminary, a program that my wife at one time ran. Did you get your master's when she was still running? It was probably after that.
It was right after she had left. I got my master's there.
But since then, Mr. Bach spent 10 years teaching Catholic religion at Notre Dame High School in Easton, Pennsylvania, which is near the Lehigh Valley, somewhat considered even part of the Lehigh Valley. And now for the past 6 years, he's been teaching at my daughter's alma mater, Allentown Central Catholic High School, teaching religion there. So for 16 years, he's got some Catholic education under his belt as a teacher. And that brings us to our topic today, which is I wanted to talk about Catholic education. And I'm going to be actually talking about Catholic education on Monday and Tuesday as well. Monday with Cale Zeldin, who works with Rod Dreher and has interviewed me. And then Tuesday, I'm talking with Robert Mixa of Word on Fire, because he is very interested in Catholic education. So I'm on a Catholic education kick here. I thought I'd do a whole theme over 3 interviews. And so we have high school education represented here and sort of university level education represented here. So I'm going to start with someone that most of you have not heard before, Jason. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Jason.
Okay.
And I'm just going to ask a very open-ended and generic question. It's going to be very pointed. What the hell's wrong with Catholic education today? Because I would submit to you that there is a lot wrong with Catholic education today. Now, mind you, we don't want to get you fired on this YouTube show here. So,
no. I mean, that's the question, isn't it? I think everyone recognizes there's a crisis not only with Catholic education but education as a whole. But putting your finger on where that is, I think is a difficult.
I'm gonna. I'm sorry to interrupt you right away. Yeah. But Howsare with that dog Lucy on his lap looks like Dr. Evil with Mr. Bigglesworth. I just got to say,
$1 million.
$1 million. Yeah. We don't bite the kitty, mini-me. Okay, so anyway, back to you, Jason. I'm sorry. I just couldn't help it. No, go ahead.
There's one of the problems with education already, right? We have Rodney Howsare with dogs on his lap while he's teaching. It's tricky. So I think probably the best way to start it, and this is something that you've helped me out greatly with, both in your written blog and the video blog, is there is something analogous to what has taken place after Vatican II as regards the church, the liturgy, and the church's place in sort of the modern world, and the misappropriation and understanding of Vatican II and its implementation that has been mimicked in some sense in the Catholic schools. And you find it definitely, I think, everywhere. It spans from elementary on up into the university level, but definitely you find it in the high school level. That what has happened is it's become to use your term and Barron's term, a beige sort of education, where
that's Bishop Barron's term, by the way.
Right, and so what's happened is, at least as far as I can understand, is that we have, in some sense, become the world in our teaching, so that we think that a public high school, like the ones in the area or anywhere, those are our competition, and that the way that we're going to go about besting them is by doing things better than they do it. And I mean, there's a lot that we could say about that, but it seems to me that one of the problems is that when Coca-Cola is going to do an advertisement and talk about how good their soft drink is, they never talk about how alike it is to Pepsi. So it already makes no sense to sort of do that, because you're not going to win too many people that way.
Drink us. We're just like Pepsi.
Yeah, we're just like Pepsi, just a different name, right? And
pretty much the same.
Yeah. So that's already problematic. And so it just seems that that there's this movement to become more like the world. And then what it ends up being, and once again, we can talk about this as we go along, it ends up becoming where we say, well, we're better at at doing this whole education thing than you are. But inevitably it means we're better at being secular than you are.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the problem. Now that's sort of a general sweeping way of saying it. I mean, there's obviously smaller things.
Okay, so let's stick with Catholic high school education before I move on to Howsare. And I wanted to definitely get Howsare's take on what's wrong, what's right about Catholic university education. But I taught before I got my dissertation finished, I taught for 4 years in a Catholic all-girls prep school in Princeton, New Jersey, Stewart Country Day School of the Sacred Heart, and it had a very attenuated sort of Catholic identity of the kind that you speak of. So I know kind of what you're talking about in a general sense. And of course, my daughter went to Central Catholic. And the interesting thing is that Central Catholic would be considered one of the success stories, right? That its Catholic identity is still considered by many to be a relatively strong feature of the school. This is no completely secularized school, right? Or is it, Jason?
See, now you put me on the spot, right?
No, I won't put you on the spot.
No. What I would say is that when the problem is that when you ask that question, there's sort of two approaches that you can go about just in the asking of it. When you ask about Catholic identity, yes, I would say Central Catholic is strong because it has a huge Catholic element to it. But when you talk about a Catholic identity in the proper sense, where it sort of informs the whole from the ground up in an organic way, and not to say that every single class is talking about Jesus all the time or something like that.
Yeah.
That's where it's different. That's where it's mimicked the world, in that there still seems to be in Catholic education a separation between church and state, science and other, and theology and the practical things.
Okay, so I want to get into this. You get all these bifurcations, all of these binaries that are deleterious to things, and I don't, and lest my viewers get bored because I'm talking about Central Catholic, like, well, what the hell do I care about Central Catholic? I talk about it because, and I have you on here because I think it's actually rather paradigmatic of quite a few Catholic high schools that are out there. It's one of the better ones that's out there. It's not top of the rung, but it's one of the better ones. And as I sent my own daughter there, and so I'm not gonna pick on Catholic high school education by zeroing in on the lowest of the low and the stupidest of the stupid. I'm not going to do that. So that's why we're focusing on this particular one. But you can extrapolate from there. Now these dichotomies. So ultimately, then. See, I don't envy Catholic school administrators right now because they've got demographic pressures, they've got marketing pressures. How Catholic can we be and still retain, the warm bodies in the chairs that we have here? We don't want to become just sort of Catholicism on steroids and scare people away. On the other hand, we don't want to be way over here just parroting the public schools and so on. So it's really kind of a question, too, of nuancing the relationship between faith and reason. So you brought up, for example, like, okay, you don't want Jesus in every class and so on. Let's take a biology class, for example. You go to some of these Christian schools, non-Catholic Christians, some of these more evangelical, fundamentalist Christian schools, and you'll actually have biology classes teaching students that evolutionary theory is false, that the Earth is 8,000 years old, that humans lived with the dinosaurs, young Earth creationism, the whole 9 yards. Okay, we certainly don't want, in other words, then a Catholic school to start essentially dictating from a theological perch what all of the other, we don't want to call them just secular disciplines, but what all the other disciplines, you want the disciplines to be professional. You want them to move from within their own eidos, their own essence. So how does a Catholic, and I'm going to move on to Howsare because this pertains to Catholic universities as well. But Jason, last question for you for this segment. How does a Catholic high school, in terms of its hiring practices, negotiate that? Because my attitude is personnel is policy. Personnel is policy. That those kinds of adjudications of how to teach biology properly within a sort of faith and reason perspective is something that's going to fall onto the responsibility of the intellect of the biology teacher, right? And so anyway, you get where I'm driving with that. Right. So what's to be done about that? How does one negotiate hiring and that kind of thing?
It's a really difficult question. One that's obviously necessary to ask, but so I'm trying to think how.
Well, let me help you out here. Is it impossible to staff Catholic high schools today with faithful biologists, faithful historians, faith-filled English teachers, because there just aren't that many of them? And so when you cast your net, when you're looking for a math teacher, and you get 10 resumes, 8 of which on the top are just absurdly awful, and you can't do that, so you're left with 2 candidates, and you desperately need a math teacher, neither candidate that's applied is a Catholic, what do you do?
But the hiring process is interesting because they incorporate, I know at Allentown Central Catholic they do this, they incorporate not only just administration, but also the chaplain always is involved. In my hiring process, obviously it's for theology, but Father Hoffa was a representative who was there, and there were serious questions about not just not in the separation of like faith and reason, but about your openness to truth. I would say is a key component. That you can still have a teacher who is not Catholic per se, and still teach well and fit within the whole dynamic. Right. But that's the difficult part, is that I guess, because what you're asking about is secondary for me. That would be like a practical thing that you have to figure out while you're going through the hiring process, et cetera. But for me, I guess what I'm after, and the question that I'm always asking is what would inform the whole educational process from the ground up, so that the hiring would then fit properly. So it's not as if you'd have to say to them, well, where's your faith life and where is your teaching, and where, as if these are some separate components that we're trying to maybe integrate in some way to make some complete whole. Mm-hmm. And so I think inevitably, and this is why this discussion is so interesting to me, is because everything that you've been talking about, especially in your video blogs lately, speaks not only to what we're doing, but also to education as a whole. And so you think of when you did Dr. Hanby and Dr. David Schindler. Yes. Those, I mean, the question about liberalism and the reduction of things and the separation of church and state, and that flows right into the whole. I mean, Rodney just leaves back. It's magic. I mean,
did not come back in. Must have hit something. Okay, so All right. So yeah, it's just so darn difficult, and what I'm trying to avoid here are the extremes of saying, well, we just need to come in with a hammer and clean house and fill those Catholic schools with a bunch of believing Catholics. And the number one is, well, good luck finding all those believing Catholics to teach all those disciplines in a very robust way and all that kind of stuff. Good luck doing that. And then good luck retaining half of your students who might walk out the door when they realize you've become an Opus Dei school or something, and not that there's anything wrong with Opus Dei, but you get the sort of a thing I'm making here. It's a real, in other words, I think Catholic administrators, it's easy to trash them, but they are behind a real difficult curve. Given our culture, given what's going on in the church, given the marketing, and anyway, Howsare, go ahead. Okay.
No, go ahead, Jason. Yeah.
Just one thing. Yes, it is very difficult, but at the same time, you look at Dr. Hanby was on recently on your show here.
Mm-hmm.
He set out on that very path with a school in Maryland, the St. Jerome School.
Yeah,
and he has laid out that when they first met, they had no idea what the hell they were doing. Right? They were discussing things there, but then it really came down to the point where they said, where do we want our children to be? Who do we want them to be? What do we want them to be? Yeah. And once they started focusing on that, it seemed then that all the other pieces started to come together. But you have to have that what you call it, a metaphysical or anthropological vision. And if you don't start with that, then you end up just falling trapped to the same hiring processes that you would have at Amazon.
This goes back, though, to my point of personnel as policy, because the reason why that was successful, at least for a while, is because it had the genius of a Dr. Michael Hanby behind it and pushing it. And so what's going to be required, in my mind, for the renovation of Catholic high school education is for the bishops of the United States to collectively pool their resources and pay some people who know what the heck they're doing to implement a curriculum of a more classical education. And that's essentially what St. Jerome's was. It was like a classical education curriculum. It can be done, as St. Jerome shows. It just takes a certain will. It takes a certain insight, and you have to find the right people to implement it. But right now, it just seems like a kind of drift. Let's just drift. Anyway, Howsare, you've been in the shadows long enough. You even got bumped off by your internet, I'm assuming, or something briefly there.
I actually rebooted because both of you had frozen, so I knew I was having issues with my connection. So
there you go.
And then when that happens, when I talk, I'm like, my mouth is moving, and then my voice is like 4 minutes behind.
But I also see you've lost Mr. Bigglesworth, so
she's
otherwise known as
my lap still. She's afraid of the weather that's coming. But
for the record, her name is Lucy, and she's a cute dog. But anyway,
and she's a genius.
Okay? So you've been listening. First off, any comments on what Jason said? Anything you want to add? And let's segue into university education. Go for it.
Yeah, this is one of those problems that is. I almost have nothing helpful to say because I think the problem is so fundamental that there's no way that you could start with like a normal Catholic university and just sort of try to rearrange the furniture a little bit and try to get it to be a Catholic university. And I think what happens is what you have now in the United States is you sort of have these at both the high school and the college level, you have sort of liberal Catholic schools and then conservative Catholic schools.
Yeah.
But neither of them, I should say, have gotten to the root of what's the problem with the modern university. And so I would just want to begin by saying that there was a break with the tradition in the Enlightenment, and the modern university grew out of that break, and its entire ethos, if you want to call it that, or whatever social imaginary, to use Charles Taylor's term, is 100% big L liberal.
Yeah.
Right. So it's no longer has any connection whatsoever with Plato's Academy, which might say, well, why would it? Right. But that I really think that's actually important. Right. Because what happens is, you later in Christendom under like Theodosius, et cetera, you get academies in Byzantium that are modeled on Plato's Academy, but now they also have Catholic stuff going on. And then the medieval university tries to repristinate that in another level in different ways. Of course, all these things don't look alike. There's development, but what they all are premised on is the notion that there are things worth studying for their own sake.
Yeah.
Just getting to the bottom of the truth of the matter is worth more than anything. And then out of that, of course, we can also have some practical things to help people get jobs, or maybe to help science. Or here she is. But until we revisit what has happened with that break at modernity, where we've prioritized the practical to the contemplative, right, as opposed to the contemplative to the practical, I think we have a major problem. And that's why I don't think you fix the problem by necessarily just having a bunch of Orthodox Catholics running around, because all those Orthodox Catholics could be liberals, right? Still, right? Even though they believe all the church's doctrines, they still believe in capitalism in some problematic way, in scientism, problematic, et cetera, et cetera. So
you are just nailing one of my hobby horses, because as a Catholic worker and all that, I have no time for all of that neocon BS. And so many of these conservative Catholic schools, universities that are supposedly so solid in their orthodoxy, are so rancid, absolutely rancid, when it comes to their endorsing of the sort of American, like you said, liberal project. So they're just conservative liberals, and they don't see that they're conservative liberals. So they start, the American nuclear deterrent, that's no problem, no big deal, military industrial we need it to save America because we are special. There is a hint of that American exceptionalism and everything in so many of these, and man, if you challenge it, they come right after you, so there's a problem there. All of they're all modeled on a sort of big L liberal template. Yeah. Okay. And so what to do about that? Okay. How do you construct a modern Catholic university? Let's say if you and I were building our Howsare Chapp U, okay, and we were going to build it from the ground up. How do you negotiate this? That's
first we would need to hire some people who would actually work, because you and I aren't good at that.
No. This is where my case falls to the ground.
We could be the figureheads, but we would really need people that would actually work.
Handle it.
Yeah.
Don't bother me with the details. I'm a big picture person.
Right.
Yes.
But on a more serious note, it seems to me that unless we first realize how, again, radical the problem is, I don't think that we're going to get anywhere, because it can't be what Big Dave Schindler calls rearranging furniture on the Titanic. It can't be that, because it's going down. So I wonder, if we realize how in both sort of progressive issues and in quote conservative issues, how out of step we are with modernity. Do we really want to turn out kids that are investment bankers? Or lawyers.
Well, yeah.
The system that we have. You know what I mean? And if we do, ought they not, almost in a sense, reject the way these things are being done in our country, almost from the ground up? Right? So that, and in medicine, we could talk about pharmaceutical. Can you have a Catholic university that has a pharmaceutical marketing program?
That's a very good point. I don't want. Yeah. I don't want to get you into any hot water here, since I know that you and I both love DeSales University, from which Jason also graduated. But I just saw their promotional ad for their spring open house, and the tagline up top clearly came from a marketing company that said, DeSales University, where we turn potential into greatness. And I'm thinking, what bullshit is that? Seriously, what bullshit is that? We turn potential into greatness? Yeah. That's clearly just came off. They probably paid somebody $300,000 to come up with that slogan. And then underneath of it, it was highlighted various very practical disciplines, like, medical this, pharmaceutical that. And I thought, well, there you go. And so it kind of, not that DeSales is any different than any other place. And that's sort of why I'm bringing them up as an example. So I think you're absolutely right. There has to be a countercultural moment.
Yeah.
There has to be this sense that the purpose of a modern Catholic university in American culture is to flip the script. To flip the script, the sort of social imaginary script, as Charles Taylor says, in the head. And that's what I'm sure Jason does in his classroom. And I know that's what you and I did in our classrooms. We often didn't teach much at all other than to flip the script. We'd spend half the semester just flipping the script so that the kids would be open to what in the heck we wanted to say in terms of substantive theological content. Otherwise, you're just throwing catechism sprinkles on top of an essentially, modern liberal soul. And they're just going to fall off and not do anything. And so many teach, and maybe Jason can speak to this in high school education. You and I can speak to it, and we've seen it with especially with adjuncts. So many people come into the classroom, Catholic theology, religion teachers, with this attitude, well, the problem with the modern church is that they just weren't good catechists. There wasn't enough good catechesis. So I'm just going to go through the catechism with these kids. Now, I'm not knocking the catechism. I love me some catechism. But you're going to fail and fail miserably if all you're going to do is walk into a room and repeat the catechism and then wash your hands of it and say, well, now they have the truth and they'll go to hell if they die in a car wreck now because they got the truth and they rejected it. So that's a whole different question. Anyway, anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you get my point. So comment on that, on what it, in other words, like I said, I keep coming back to this. Personnel is policy. Personnel is policy. It means hiring the right people. So I think constructing a proper Catholic school, whether it's high school or whether it's a university, means you get teachers who can flip that script. Do you agree? I mean, what say ye to that, Howsare?
Yeah, and I'd like to hear Jason here on this too, because I think you probably have something to say about this, Jason, because you have the same, I'm sure, frustrations. But there's a lot of blowback going on in this world right now against big L liberalism and neoliberal economics. I mean, so you have Joel Salatin, organic farming, and you have, even something as silly, you always make it fun of me, but the revival of vinyl records. This is not the most efficient, slick way of producing music. It's a pain in the butt. You've got these big plastic discs.
I'm surrounded by vinylophiles in my life these days, between you and Father Gribowich.
Yeah. Or you even think about there are all these whiskeys going back to old methods, bottled in bond, and the beers that are being made according to medieval standards of making beer. And this is really catching on. Or the slow food movement, where people are literally making food from farm to table from scratch rather than these quick, bull crap fast food nonsense, right? So if all that stuff can happen in this world as a kind of blowback against the kind of Henry Ford approach to things, why not make Catholic schools centers of places that turn people like this out, that have a whole different understanding of education? What does it mean to be a farmer? What does it mean to be a banker? What would it look like if we had a banking system modeled on some throwback thing where we don't charge exorbitant interest? And
how cool would this be? Oh, you're really just igniting my brain now. I'm going to get Jason's take on this in a second, but this is just so much what has been rattling around in my brain lately too. How cool would it be if Catholic schools, Catholic universities, became known for being these sort of deeply countercultural sort of havens of a kind of neo-bohemianism, where everything was hip and avant-garde and back to the land and back to the basics and screw corporate America, stick it to the man kind of centers of hipness and coolness. And not that we want to kowtow it, but you get my point. How hard would that be? It would attract people by the thousands, I think.
I think it would, even if it only attracted people by the hundreds. It's a start. I like it.
Well, yeah, yes. And I think that what you see even in the current model of Catholic education is that the most successful professors, in no matter what discipline in our schools, and we all know this, are the ones who are doing precisely that, are the ones who color outside the lines. are the ones who have a bit of an eccentric personality, are the ones who don't mind sticking it to sacred cows and have a certain kind of countercultural bohemian quality about them. Those are always the most popular teachers. And there's a reason for that. They're refreshing, they're authentic. They're saying something that isn't just boilerplate BS so you can get a job. And we got to play it safe because these kids got to take a test someday to get board certified and XYZ and blah, blah, blah. I feel sorry for teachers that got to teach like that. Anyway, Jason, what say you to this proposal of every teacher a freak?
I think, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that I remember Robert Spemann gave a talk to one of the children's houses in Germany. And then there's the written part of it in the book that DC Schindler translated with his wife. And he basically said what was great about this house was the fact that when you went there, that it offered something radically different than what the world offered you. Mm-hmm. And that there was something about it when you went there that it actually prepared you to go out and do battle with the world and deal with the craziness. Mm-hmm. And when you sell a script, like most high schools do, and you're right, because you have to put warm bodies in seats and you have to make money and you have to do all these things because you're not funded by the state. When you mimic the world and you say you're preparing them for their career or then you really do. I mean, you give birth to the same old. And
you do.
It really does. It requires a radical reinterpretation. That's why I think Plato, is really important, Rodney, that you had said. And something that Dr. DC Schindler said when he was on here. I mean, he sort of anticipates everything. I mean, it's unbelievable how much he does. And the allegory of the cave is about education. And really it's a conversion. And the man who or woman who escapes is dragged out. It's not the same, here's another shadow in this other direction. Let's watch this one and lead him out. I mean, it is a conversion, and it's a radical one. That not that then you do away with the shadows. And I think this is the interesting part. It's not like some of the things we're doing in Catholic schools, we have to say, get rid of everything, right? You have to start everything over. But there are some good things that are there. Once again, like DC Schindler said when he was talking to you about the extra modern, that there are certain things, instead of going to pre-modern, and you don't just have to, and classical education, I'm going all over the place, but classical education is interesting because it's not simply just a method. That we don't have to go back to the way that they taught, when Augustine was learning and Thomas Aquinas and the medieval synthesis and things like that. It's not that. It's a substance. Yeah. It's a content that is presented. So whether you call it the great books or whatever it may be, what you show is that there's a unity. There's a unity in the fact that when you're doing biology, there's something about it when you start studying life that already should be opening you to the question saying, what's the meaning of it all? Yeah. And that's where then the connection and the unity would be. But that to do that is going to require so you could still hold on to some of the things that the Catholic schools have, but you have to go, I think, like you said, with the people that you hire at the ground level, you really have to have radically different type of thinkers, people who have
and you are right to point to these have to be people of substance too, who know their disciplines well. They're not just. I don't want to leave the impression I'm saying every teacher's just got to be some kind of a character, a sort of faux bohemian. I'm not talking about stupid Dead Poet Society, oh Captain, my Captain style over substance. I'm talking about people who begin with substance but have the gift and the knack for turning that substance into something truly provocative, truly outrageous, truly countercultural.
And also, I'm thinking also able, and this is something that I learned from both of you when I was there as your mentors for this, is that not only can they be radical and know their content, but when the kids that are in front of you, the students are professing a totally different type of idea that comes from the world, you're able to engage it and actually reveal to them that there's way more to it than just, so it doesn't end up where you're just butting heads in the classroom. Yeah. Right? There's a way that you'd say, okay, I understand exactly this. Here's something good about it, but let me show you the real good, the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to know your discipline, especially in the humanities, especially in theology, philosophy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
To know your discipline so well, so inside and out, that you know all objections to it better than the objectors do, and can redefine their objections for them properly, in a way that really disarms, and it can be quite charming actually to watch it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Howsare, I was going to ask. Anyway, go ahead. Say something. I had a question for you, and I was so enamored of my own eloquence, I forgot what it was. So go ahead.
I love what Jason just said about even a biology class, right? We don't want to throw out modern biology, right? But there is a danger in modern biology where instead of pursuing the mystery of life, it just brackets it out because it's a pain in the butt,
Yeah.
And then you end up not only not sort of pushing through to try to find out the truth of things, but then you end up having to come up with some alternative explanation, which is always going to be stupider and worse, than it's mysterious, right? Like a mechanism for evolution is kind of silly. You need more than a mechanism for organisms organisms have done over there to account for consciousness and language.
Hey, don't knock mechanisms. They're the only thing keeping me alive right now.
Yeah, like
but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, right. So it would be like that across the board, though. Like, what does it mean to run a business, right? Let's ask the question, what is the purpose? What are the purposes of a business? Or let's say I want to sell cars or make cars, even. Let's say, okay, I'm going to become a car manufacturer. How would that be transformed if I thought about that kind of from the ground up? What good are now it may be that we come to the conclusion that we can't in good conscience make cars if we're that's a possibility. I don't know, maybe we should be finding ways to get rid of cars, but whatever, those are questions that have to be asked. We can't just assume that a Catholic is going to just start a car business and it's going to look like everybody else's car business. Because it has to be that fundamental questioning that Jason just talked about.
And gosh, so our conversation is segued from this big theoretical discussions of structure and culture to really, I think, what is the heart and soul of the question: pedagogy. Yeah. How does a modern school go about teaching? That's what schools are there for, a Catholic school. What's its pedagogy? And I think we can all agree that in most education departments in most universities today, what is taught as proper pedagogy is a complete nightmare. I'm not going to speak to anybody that's at my former university, DeSales. I don't even know who teaches education there anymore. Yeah. But I just know that, I would always tell my students, for example, at the beginning of every semester of every class, set aside everything you've ever learned in any education class you've ever learned, because I am every education professor's living, walking nightmare. Because I'm going to violate every rule that they say that you're supposed to follow. And I'm going to violate it because my humanity demands it and your humanity needs it. So anyway, what Jason, what would you say to that? That we're not being taught how to really teach. Or let me ask you another question. And this, Howsare, you can answer this too, because courses in pedagogy can be somewhat helpful in giving you little tips and techniques. But my theory is this: teachers are born and not made. And you either have a knack for communicating a subject matter to students, or you don't. And it's largely a function of your personality. Do you agree with that, Jason, or not?
No, I agree completely. The education classes that I've had, or that we've had, when we're at the high school or even at the collegiate level, where they do these professional development days on things, it's all method. And it's simply just, A, B, C, do this and everything. But you're right. If you don't, if you're not that type of person, if you don't have that sort of gift, then you could have every method available to you. You could have every piece of technology you have, and it'll fall flat. And that's why and this is something that I wanted to bring up, because I thought both of you can speak to it. it's always interesting to me that when in all of my classes that I had at DeSales and continue to have now in the graduate course that I've taken, but in a liberal way, but when you go to English class, you would have a PhD, Dr. So-and-so. When you would go to even biology, it would generally be a PhD. It wasn't like an MD or something like that. But PhD, it stands for, it's a philosophy degree. And so
used to be.
Yeah, exactly. But there's something there that it just seems to me
just like divinity degrees used to be about God, but aren't anymore.
Right. So they're just a name now, but I mean, that was really the essence of it. That it was at every moment your subject content was limited, so that if you spoke on biology, obviously you have to specialize in biology and you have to know biology really well. But you can't close that off and say that it's sort of independent from everything else.
The PH part of PhD was meant to imply that we teach in true universities, where there is an encyclical or circular nature to the disciplines, all in conversation with them. But the hub is philosophy, theology, the queen of the sciences, and so that model. I mean, Newman talks about that, right? Obviously, the idea of a university. That model is about as dead as it gets. But I think that it's kind of what we're all talking about here. You talked about Hanby and St. Jerome's. We're talking about rebuilding a Catholic school from the ground up with flipping the script sort of mentality, and this is what we're actually talking about, really. The nub of it is we're talking about resurrecting the old-fashioned idea. I'm so glad you brought this up, Jason, that we've completely, and Hauser, you hinted at it in talking about liberalism, that we've completely lost the hub, upon which the entire thing turns, and it's got to be retrieved. I was going to say something else too about education. Anyway, Hauser, go ahead. It looks like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I actually have two things. One, to kind of follow up on something Jason said. I'm so glad you said it, actually, because this is exactly what I was thinking when Larry asked you the question. I was like, this is what I would say, and then you said
it. Well, my phone's. Ignore my phone. I forgot to turn my phone off.
Okay,
just ignore it.
Hang
on a second.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. I just double checked mine to make sure I turned this ringer off.
Well, this is my answering machine, and the lady on the machine always has this electronic. Yeah, this is spam from blah, blah, and it completely butchers whatever name that it is, proving that modern technology is still lacks the alacrity of the human tongue. But anyway, go ahead, Hauser.
Yeah. So the thing about the teaching thing is. It seems to be that I think what makes a great teacher is first and foremost sort of their commitment to the truth of what it is they're teaching, right? Right. So you think about, like, was Socrates like an effective teacher or a good teacher? Or this, I don't think he ever gave that a thought. Like he just did this thing where he would stop you in your tracks and say, whoa, wait a second. What is piety? Just when you thought you were on to the next topic, he's like, whoa, wait, back up. What's piety? And now you're going to have that conversation with him. You're going to realize that, oh my gosh, I've assumed all my life I knew what this meant, but he's showing me that I really don't know what it means. And that's just interesting by itself. And it kind of takes care of the whole pedagogical thing, because now we're having a conversation and we forgot that we're teaching and learning. And that's my best classes I have as a teacher are still like that, where I don't come in. I mean, I come in with a plan, but whatever happens. All of a sudden, we find ourselves talking about a big idea, and the students forget that I'm teaching, and they forget that they're students. And all of a sudden, we're just like trying to figure this thing out. And that's the magic. I mean, it doesn't always happen. It's hard to get there, but it's almost like, almost like when you most forget about your, quote, technique as a teacher. It's kind of like when you're riding a bike. As soon as you forget about can I ride a bike? You're good at it. But if you're like, oh, I'm walking, then it's. I think teaching is a little bit like that. But I want to now say something a little bit more substantial to go back to your previous question, Larry, because you kind of brought up the DeSales thing, and it's funny because DeSales is an interesting place, and I think the consensus of people looking at it from the outside are it used to be sort of faithfully Catholic, and now it's going liberal, And there might be some truth to it in various ways, whatever. My thing on DeSales is that it's always been liberal.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So I mean,
It was just
actually,
always Republican liberal before.
yeah. So in other words, we had a business department when Father O'Connor was there. God bless Father O'Connor. I hear he's not doing that great, so I keep him in my prayers.
Oh,
And I
really?
really
Yeah.
liked that guy a lot. I mean, he was a
Oh,
super
I love
fun
Father
guy, super
O'Connor.
smart
Yeah.
guy, the whole bit. Um, but at any rate, our business department was just like every other business department in the freaking world, only probably not quite as good because we're DeSales, or whatever, right? But we had
Yeah.
a mediocre to pretty good business department. There was
It's
nothing.
good. It's a good thing you have tenure. I'm just going to say that. And you're a
Yeah,
full professor. And
there was nothing distinctively Catholic about the department. I mean, I mean, there were some Catholics. God bless them; they're good people and all that stuff. And so I have friends in that department. But it's just like they teach marketing, just like every other marketing department. You try to get people to buy stuff they don't need because it makes profit, and then you get shareholders are happy
Yeah.
and everybody's happy. And it's so there's no. And then the same thing is like we have a bunch of scientists who practice science exactly according to the modern methods without ever raising any question about whether that goes far enough or whether mechanism is the best way to look at you know what I mean? So even though we had a orthodox philosophy and theology department, the university itself was just a university with some Orthodox priests on campus and some Orthodox theologians and philosophers on campus, and that smattering of Orthodox Catholics in other departments. But even there, and I'm not knocking anyone as individuals, they were still doing their discipline as if they weren't Catholic. They are, you know what I mean? That it made no difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As the late great former president, Father Dan Gambit, God bless his soul.
Yeah.
Because I loved him too. But he used to say, "There's no such thing as Catholic computer science." Well, that is so naive. That's true in one sense, right? But it's also naive because it ignores the fact that a computer science professor still votes on curriculum issues. A computer science professor is still a human being who's going to have an influence over the students in his classroom. And a computer science professor might actually, from time to time, talk about how computers fit in with the entire world of the humanities and how it's changing us and so on. So, but you're right. That's that mentality. And it goes back to what we were saying before. Even some of these very conservative Catholic schools, we're still big L liberal, just in a conservative direction. And therefore, it should be no surprise when you get a different president. All of a sudden, there may be little L liberals, right? And it's also, I remember when we built the new Gambit Center at DeSales, and once again, I don't want to focus just on DeSales and might bore people, but this is instructive, and it was known as this fairly conservative school.
On the Newman Guide.
So, they built the new Gambit Center for Business, and I went up to the second floor, or whatever it is. They have that little mock stock ticker, Wall Street stock ticker room behind the glass, and they had the little ribbon sticker going. And right above that was a crucifix. And I remember thinking, well, there's Jesus sprinkles for you right there, isn't it? There's sprinkles on the ice cream. This, here we have Jesus blessing Wall Street right there. And I make a bet that we didn't teach, economics any differently than any other, so your point is well taken, that it's on the level of substance that the rubber meets the road. And if we're going to just continue teaching, even from a conservative perspective, as other places do, then we're just setting ourselves up, kind of for a world of hurt, so to speak. Jason,
sorry, just
go ahead. No, Howsare, go ahead.
And it ended up really actually making matters worse because we were so like every other university in every other way. Then when we finally did put our foot down and say, we're not going to have an LGBTQ club or something like that, then it just seemed like totally arbitrary.
It rang hollow.
And I can almost totally understand why the faculty were like, "What the heck is wrong with you, barbarians?" So it was just such a not. Whereas if you were kind of doing this from the ground up, all of these principles that you kind of stand up for and don't stand up for would flow logically from each other, and you would also show people how that they could transcend these stupid left-right categories in our stupid politics in America.
It's true, and it would help. It would help to contextualize, for example, and I'm going to get back to Jason in a second. I'm glad you brought up the LGBTQ issue because in a lot of ways, when I still taught there, and I'm sure a lot of Catholic theology professors run into the same thing. So I'm not just being idiosyncratic about myself. I would rarely, first off, I didn't teach moral theology, so lucky me. I would rarely ever bring up the topic of homosexuality in my classroom, because my views would have run counter to 95% of the students sitting in front of me. And not only run counter them, I don't care if I run counter to my students generally. I do all the time. The point is that issue is the third rail that you don't touch. And as soon as you touch it, you're dead. As soon as you touch it in a way that shows any disapproval whatsoever for the LGBTQ movement, you're dead as a teacher in that classroom. And and so the point being, you don't lead with that, and you can't lead with that. You have to teach them to walk before they run, and you have softly, not to crush the bruised reed, and you have to prepare the soul. So what you were just talking about, Howsare, is exactly my point. If you do it right, and you get rid of these false categories of right, left, and these binaries that we move in within the big L liberal order, if you begin from a different perspective and slowly walk together in a certain direction, then even these third rail issues like that are diffused and become discussable. And they otherwise, it's just like you said, you're otherwise just following this completely normal model, and then boom, all right, gay sex is bad. You're out of here. Okay, see you next week. It's not going to work. That's not going to fly. Anyway, Jason, go ahead.
No, I agree with everything you're saying, but this goes back to what you were saying in the beginning, how difficult a project it is. Because I mean, you'd have to start with principles. I mean, you would have to and have everyone agree. And I think the biggest problem is, at least for me, when I speak to administrators or I speak to, at these educational meetings that we have, diocesan wide, and, I'll make these sort of points, but it's always interpreted and siphoned through already the big L liberal model. So it's like you're speaking a totally different language. And this is obvious, I think, for your listeners, and I know that you agree with this, but it's because the big L liberalism will allow nothing outside of itself to be discussed. It's sort of, it's top down. It controls everything. And that's exactly why people say, well, if you do that, I mean, this is what I get all the time. If you do that, well, then we won't have a school. Like everyone won't be able to do anything anymore. I mean, what can we do then? And it really is. And that's the most difficult part, because they've already given
up. Did it
ever
cross their minds maybe we shouldn't have a school then? What's our reason for being here? Is our reason for being here just to be here? Or do we stand for something? And if we don't stand for anything, why the heck should we continue on? I always thought that. I always thought that when I was at DeSales, is this place does it have to survive and exist as a simple employment agency for wayward academics that need a job and who otherwise would not have one? And it would it wreck some vast eternal plan, to quote Tevye, if there was no some of these universities and high schools simply disappeared? And I don't think they would if we stuck. I want to come back to the LGBTQ thing, though, Howsare, because as I was speaking, it dawned on me, you teach a course at DeSales essentially on the theology of the body, or at least you used to. Yeah. So how did I've always marveled at that, because obviously at some point in that semester you had to deal with that topic.
Yeah.
So how did you negotiate that in a way that just didn't completely lose 3/4 of the class?
Yeah, you already anticipated the answer to this in the way you were talking about it, because it seems to me that what you have to do is establish a logic that has implications for all sorts of things. Yes. So, so a lot of times right in the middle of my course on the body, I will show that documentary Fresh, which shows how Joel Salatin farms. And they start to like put two and two. Of course, they love it. They hate to see like animals being hurt because they're very emotive. And so the movie has all kinds of shock value, like cows lined up in aluminum sheds, and they can't move because they're in stocks. The whole bit. And then there's like they show Joel Salatin's farm, and the cows are like mooing, and they're happy as they can be, and he's all like sprinkling food to the chickens and stuff. So it's very effective, kind of propaganda. No, it's just good rhetoric, actually. But the point is, what he asks in farming is that we respect already where the natural order wants to go. A cow wants to graze. It wants to eat grass. It doesn't want to be locked in a tin shed. Chickens, if you let them come into the fields after the cows, will eat the parasites out of their feces. So your cows won't get mad cow disease, or, we don't have to pump them full of antibiotics. He says at one point in the documentary something astounding. When he was working in factory farms, it was just antibiotics all the time because the cows were always sick. And like for 10 years on that organic farm, he had never used antibiotics on a single cow or something like that.
We never give our sheep or chickens antibiotics ever.
Because they
There's
do
no
it
need.
Right. They kind of do it.
Yeah.
So by honoring, so where does nature already point? Where does it want to go? And how do I get in sync with that in my farming? And now I cultivate nature by cooperating with it. Well, then I'll just ask them, well, how does this apply to the fact that sex is naturally open to babies and is unitive?
Yeah.
They're like, and all of a sudden they're like, they don't like where the logic goes, but they at least have to admit that there's a consistent logic running across a variety of things. And I'll tell you who does a great job, I'll give him a shout out, is Danny Drain's been doing that class for us. And I'll tell you what, I see his evals. I'm telling tales out of school now, but to teach that class in the context of these students, Larry, these Generation Z, you don't even have any idea how you can't even, it's so sensitive, right? This thing.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Somehow he says he teaches them this without offending, he still wins them over somehow. They don't necessarily agree with him. And of course, he doesn't demand that. We can't force people to agree with this. But he at least says, look, guys, I just want you to see the logic of the Catholic position and just let you know that your logic is also consistent. It's liberal logic all the way up. And if you follow liberal logic all the way, then of course two dudes can have sex. That's okay. Yeah, no big deal, right? Because nature is whatever, So,
which goes back to our original insight, that if a Catholic university becomes this completely different sort of place, an alternative, countercultural, back to the land, back to basics kind of place, then you build up already a reservoir of both goodwill, but then also you flip the script of a certain kind of logic that then these topics now become reopened for conversation, assuming, of course, that the people doing the discussing are not just jerks. I mean, this you know what like I mean? I'm just thinking, I don't know. I don't want to get bogged down on this topic, and we're kind of running out of time. But I just think, for example, you see, for example, criticisms of Bishop Robert Barron from certain rad trad elements who essentially say, well, he didn't tell that Jew boy, Ben Shapiro, that he needed to convert or he's going to go to hell. Well, you don't speak like, he talked about that Jesus was the fulfillment of Judaism and so forth. This is how you do it. Likewise, they criticized Barron for, and I'm just using Barron because he's a very effective evangelizer and a very effective teacher, and Barron too. I mean, he's clearly against gay marriage and all that sort of stuff, but he doesn't foreground. He says, let's walk before we run. Let's talk about the logic of things. Oh, he's not coming down hard enough on all that stuff. And to me, this is why I'm sympathetic with his project. And it's also, I think, what you're saying here with what Danny Drain does, what you did in your course, is that you cannot come in with just both guns blazing, throwing catechisms at people like weapons and saying, read this Aquinas crap and now you're going to be better. And I love Aquinas, but anyway, I'm rambling. Gentlemen, we are now, it's been an hour. Is there any other topics that we haven't covered that should be? Mr. Bach, do you have any other topics you'd like to cover?
I want to hear from Jason.
Well, there's a tremendous amount that we probably could say. Two things that I think that are really important that I've tried to incorporate that both of you have taught me, that Balthasar has taught me, is the place of beauty in all of this, and then the place of the imagination. This is something that I constantly attempt to do in the classroom. So to take that model, like some of the rad trads do, or just even some people that think that it's loving just to tell people how it is, put them in their place and sort of show it. I just think if Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and he does so by sacrificing his life and not shoving it down your throat, but by giving his life for it. And there's something radically different in the approach. And I think beauty is the way to do it. That And I have the students more than both of you did. Although you get an interesting aspect where you get to see them outside of the classroom more so in public events where high school teachers really don't, we don't do that type of thing for a whole bunch of legal and other reasons. But the thing is that beauty, just revealing the beauty of things, the beauty of nature, where the truth and the goodness sort of come together in the appearance of things, really does help with laying out the logic. I mean, it'd be highfalutin, we could talk forever about that, but beauty seems to be, I mean, like Balthazar says, that you get rid of beauty, then she's going to take her sisters with her.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me that, and they have no idea what beauty is, right? They've reduced it to eye of the beholder, things like that. And so once you start unpacking, I mean, it's quite obvious. It's so easy to say, if beauty's in the eye of the beholder, then I'll pick one student in the classroom. I'm like, when I say you're beautiful, right? They generally take that as a compliment. But I'll say to them, but if it's beauty in the eye of the beholder, it has nothing to say about you. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And see,
I've told this story before, maybe a million times, maybe too many times. But when I was in undergraduate seminary, I had a spiritual director, Father Anton Morgenroth, who was a convert from Judaism. He was German. He fled Germany with his family, fled Hitler. He was from Berlin. He was an accomplished concert pianist, loved Mozart and so on, and knew Balthazar. And he's the vehicle through which I became introducible. Anyway, he was my spiritual director. And very first spiritual direction, I went into his room, and he had a big grand piano in his room. And he said, "Sit down." And I sat down. He looked like a cross between Leonard Bernstein and Alfred Hitchcock, if you can sort of image this sort of guy, bald guy, little sausages all over his shirt. But anyway, so he sits down at the piano and he opens it up and he simply starts playing Mozart. And he plays for like half an hour, and I'm sitting there. It's all very beautiful. And he says, "Okay, the same time next week." And I said, "But Father, what about spiritual direction?" And he just put his head down and he goes, "You pathetic imbecile. That was spiritual direction." and that was his way of telling me, we're going to lead with beauty. And everything is going to flow from beauty. And your theology, your philosophy, your studies, everything is going to begin and end with beauty. Beauty in the right sense, right? Not just something pretty, but beauty in that deeper sense. Anyway, Howsare, yes, any last words?
No, that's great. But I was just thinking about, like, when I do show that documentary, Fresh, it is interesting that what Joel Salatin is doing on his farm is beautiful. You know what I mean? Like the landscape, the grass is beautiful, the buildings are beautiful, the all the animals are beautiful in there, because he has a variety of crops and animals and things. And when they show the factory farm with the 50 billion cows lined up in stocks, it's hideous. I mean, they're all standing in their own feces. Yeah. I mean, it really is ugly, and that's where that's so effective. And Jason's absolutely right. Like, if you can get them to see how ugly mechanism is, then you can persuade them that mechanism is stupid. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a good way of, like, in some ways, criticizing some of the worst elements of Darwin, is to show where that ugly logic leads. I mean, when he says things like, Africans are closer to apes than they are to Europeans.
Yeah.
Good heavens. But I mean, or even just his that notion that nature is just all competitive and all scarcity, which he gets from Malthus. That's ugly. That doesn't describe the world as we see it in all of its fullness and beauty.
And but this is a good point, because Darwin was also very anti-slavery. And what's interesting is the juxtaposition of the fact that his biology and his views on race, in light of his biology, was ugly. It's just ugly. And yet, so whence came his moral sense that slavery was wrong? Yeah. Obviously, it came from the residue of Christianity that he had within him. And it certainly didn't come from his biological points of view, which really were quite ugly. And it brings us back sort of to square one in terms of talking about pedagogy here, that, like I said, talking about flipping the script. Oftentimes I would say that the first part of my class was always, in essence, an exercise in cultural deconstruction, cultural demolition. And what you would try to do is use a lot of humor to, in a sense, show how unbelievably hysterical, in the sense of stupid, modern culture is. And it's not hard to do. If you have the slightest eye for irony and stupidity and imbecility, it's not a hard thing to do, to lampoon modern culture. And so that's why, Jason, I do like to think about starting with beauty, because beauty is related to truth and goodness, and those things will always win out at the end of the day over the sheer ugliness and imbecility of so much of what goes. Sometimes, in other words, and we'll end on this note, we tend to think that we're like Sisyphus trying to roll that stone up the hill, Catholic education and modern culture. And yet, I always harbor the hope that maybe someday Sisyphus will actually, oh crap, I'm at the top, and all of a sudden, boom, mission accomplished. And so hopefully, that will be our experience as well, that there will be this tipping point, and all of a sudden people will begin to realize, that Catholic thing wasn't so bad after all. But we have to start now. We have to start now by, in a sense, formulating a Catholic educational system that's interesting. More than anything, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I thank you, gentlemen, for this conversation. It's been a lot of fun. Obviously, there's been a lot of joking around today, the viewers and us, because we know each other, and we know each other quite well. And these are two of my favorite people in the universe. So I thank them for coming on, gentlemen. And I will now, because I don't have my glasses on, hit stop record. Don't say anything rude till I tell you.
Okay, we'll wait.
Stop.